The fluorescent lights in the pharmacy cast harsh shadows across my face as I stood there at 3:17 a.m., watching my entire career crumble in real time. The DEA agent's badge gleamed under those cold lights as he read from his tablet. 47 controlled substance prescriptions issued under your medical license in the past 3 months. My hands trembled as I gripped the counter. I had never written a single one of those prescriptions. It started like any other night shift at St. Mary's Hospital in downtown Phoenix. The desert heat still radiated from the pavement even at midnight, and the emergency room buzzed with the usual chaos of Friday night overdoses, bar fights, and cardiac arrests. I'd been working these shifts for 8 years, ever since I graduated from nursing school at Arizona State. The night differential pay helped me afford my small apartment near Camelback Mountain, and I genuinely loved the adrenaline of emergency medicine. But tonight was different. At 2:45 a.m., security guard Martinez approached me with an expression I'd never seen before. His usual warm smile was replaced by something that looked like pity mixed with fear. "Sarah, I need you to come with me," he said quietly, his thick Mexican accent more pronounced when he was nervous. The way he avoided my eyes made my stomach drop. We walked past the bustling nurses' station where my colleagues were too busy to notice. The smell of antiseptic and coffee filled the hallways as we made our way to the administrative wing. Each step echoed against the polished linoleum floors, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Martinez's radio crackled with routine security updates, but everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. The conference room held 3 people I'd never seen before: 2 DEA agents and hospital administrator Mrs. Patterson, whose gray hair was pulled back in her signature tight bun. She wouldn't look at me directly. The lead agent, a stern woman in her 50s with short auburn hair, introduced herself as Agent Rodriguez. Her voice was professional but cold as she explained why I was there. "Ms. Thompson, we've been monitoring suspicious prescription activity linked to your nursing license. Multiple pharmacies across the Phoenix metropolitan area have reported unusual patterns in controlled substance prescriptions bearing your credentials." She slid a thick manila folder across the conference table. My hands shook as I opened it. The first page showed a prescription for 90 OxyContin pills, allegedly written by me at 2:30 a.m. on a Tuesday when I was here, documented on security cameras, working my shift. The pharmacy was Valley Drugs on Indian School Road, a place I'd never even driven past. My signature was there, but it looked wrong somehow. Too neat, too deliberate. I always signed quickly, with a characteristic loop in the S that was missing here. "This isn't my signature," I whispered, my voice barely audible above the humming air conditioning. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward, her brown eyes studying my face intently. "That's what they all say, Ms. Thompson. But your license number is correct, and the prescribing patterns match your work schedule." I flipped through page after page of fraudulent prescriptions. Adderall, Percocet, fentanyl patches, Xanax, a pharmacy's worth of controlled substances, all bearing my name and license number. Each prescription was from a different pharmacy, one near Tempe Town Lake, another in Scottsdale, several in the rough neighborhoods around South Phoenix where addiction rates were highest. The date spanned 3 months, always on nights when I was working here at the hospital. Mrs. Patterson finally spoke, her voice strained. "Sarah, your hospital access badge shows you were here during most of these prescription times. But someone could have used your login credentials remotely to access our prescription system." She paused, looking uncomfortable. "However, hospital policy requires us to suspend you immediately pending investigation." The words hit me like a physical blow. Suspended. In 8 years of nursing, I'd never even received a written warning. I thought about my patients who depended on me, my upcoming rent payment, my student loans. "You can't be serious," I said, my voice stronger now, fueled by desperation. "Someone is obviously using my identity. Why would I risk my career for this?" Agent Rodriguez's expression didn't change. "Financial pressure is the most common motive. Your credit report shows significant student loan debt and recent medical bills from your mother's cancer treatment." She knew about Mom's chemotherapy treatments at Banner MD Anderson. She knew about the bills that kept me awake at night, adding numbers that never seemed to get smaller. "My mother is in remission," I said firmly, "and I would never, ever compromise patient safety or break my oath for money." But even as I said it, I realized how desperate I must have looked to them. A single nurse working night shifts, struggling with debt, with access to controlled substances and prescription systems. Security guard Martinez stood by the door like a sentinel, avoiding eye contact. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he believed I was guilty. We'd shared countless cups of coffee during quiet moments, talked about his daughter's quinceañera preparations, laughed about the crazy things people did during full moons. Now he was watching me become another cautionary tale. The suspension paperwork felt heavy in my hands as Agent Rodriguez explained the investigation process. My badge was confiscated, my locker would be searched, and I was banned from hospital grounds until further notice. "Don't leave town, Ms. Thompson. We'll need you available for questioning as this investigation proceeds." Walking through the hospital lobby at 4:30 a.m., escorted by security, I felt every night shift worker's eyes on me. The maintenance crew mopping floors, the late arriving residents grabbing coffee, the paramedics wheeling in their next patient. They all watched as my career was publicly dismantled. The automatic doors opened with their familiar swoosh, releasing me into the pre-dawn darkness of the Sonoran Desert. My Toyota Corolla sat alone in the staff parking lot under a flickering streetlight. The desert wind carried the scent of creosote and the distant sound of traffic on Interstate 10. As I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, one thought consumed me. Whoever was destroying my life had to be someone with inside access, someone who knew my schedule, my license number, my financial situation. Someone I trusted. The question that would haunt my sleepless days ahead was simple but terrifying. Who at St. Mary's Hospital wanted to destroy me, and why? ¿Conoces a alguien que haya pasado por algo similar? Déjame saber en los comentarios why no olvide suscribir para saber cómo termina esta historia. The Phoenix sun was merciless at 2 p.m. when I pulled into the parking lot of Valley Drugs on Indian School Road. I hadn't slept since leaving the hospital 10 hours ago, surviving on gas station coffee and pure adrenaline. The prescription folder from the DEA sat on my passenger seat like evidence of my own guilt, but I needed to see these places for myself, needed to understand how someone had used my identity so systematically. Valley Drugs occupied a strip mall between a check-cashing place and a taqueria called El Corazon. The smell of carne asada mixed with desert dust and car exhaust as I walked across the cracked asphalt. Through the pharmacy's windows, I could see shelves of medications behind bulletproof glass. This wasn't the kind of place that catered to suburban soccer moms picking up their kids' antibiotics. The pharmacist, a thin man in his 60s with graying hair and tired eyes, looked up nervously when I approached the counter. His name tag read, Frank Gutierrez, PharmD. Behind him, security cameras monitored every angle of the small space. "Can I help you?" he asked, but his voice carried suspicion. "My name is Sarah Thompson. I'm a nurse at St. Mary's Hospital, and I need to ask you about some prescriptions that were supposedly filled here under my name." I slid the fraudulent OxyContin prescription across the counter. Frank's face immediately changed, recognition and fear flashing in his eyes. "You," he said quietly, then louder, "you're the one who's been sending those patients here." His hands shook slightly as he picked up the prescription. "Do you have any idea what you've put me through? The DEA has been crawling all over this place for weeks." My heart sank. "Mr. Gutierrez, I've never been to this pharmacy before in my life. Someone has been using my identity to write these prescriptions. I'm trying to figure out who." He studied my face carefully, then glanced at the prescription again. "The woman who came in here didn't look like you. Shorter, maybe 45, bleached blonde hair, always wore scrubs like she was coming from a hospital shift. She had your ID, your license number, everything checked out in our system." A chill ran down my spine despite the desert heat. "Can you describe her more specifically? Did she have an accent? Any distinguishing features?" Frank nodded slowly. Heavy smoker's voice, that raspy sound, you know? Always seemed nervous, kept checking her phone. And she had this scar on her left hand, shaped like a crescent moon. I remember because she always signed the paperwork with that hand. I pulled out my phone and showed him my hospital ID photo. "This is me. You're absolutely certain this isn't the woman who came in here?" "Positive. Look, I've been doing this for 23 years. I know when something's off." But her credentials always checked out, and the prescriptions looked legitimate in our system. What was I supposed to do? His voice carried the weight of someone who'd been manipulated and knew it. I spent the next 4 hours driving to every pharmacy on the DEA list. The pattern was always the same. A woman in scrubs, claiming to be me, with perfect credentials and a nervous demeanor. At Desert Sun Pharmacy near Tempe, the technician remembered her driving a white Honda Civic with hospital parking stickers. At Camelback Drugs in Scottsdale, she'd always paid with cash and refused to provide a phone number for their records. By evening, I was exhausted but had a clear picture of my impersonator. Someone who knew my schedule well enough to time the prescription visits for when I was provably at work. Someone with access to hospital scrubs and possibly parking passes. Someone who smoked heavily and had a distinctive crescent-shaped scar on her left hand. I sat in my car outside the last pharmacy, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. The pieces were starting to form a picture, and I didn't like what I was seeing. This wasn't random identity theft. This was personal, calculated, and it required inside knowledge of hospital operations. My phone buzzed with a text from my coworker Jessica. "Girl, what's going on? Supervisor Wilson is telling everyone you were arrested for drug trafficking. Please tell me this isn't true." Wilson. Supervisor Linda Wilson, a woman in her mid-40s who'd started at St. Mary's about 6 months ago. Bleached blonde hair that she touched up religiously. A smoker who took frequent breaks behind the hospital dumpsters. And most importantly, someone with administrative access to all nursing credentials and schedules. I tried to remember if I'd ever noticed a scar on her hand, but Wilson always wore long sleeves and latex gloves during her shifts. She was the kind of supervisor who watched everything, knew everyone's business, and had access to personnel files that contained license numbers, addresses, and financial information. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my contacts to find Wilson's number. 3 months ago, she'd offered to help me manage my mother's medical bills, suggesting I could pick up extra shifts or find alternative income sources. At the time, I'd thought she was being supportive. Now, those words took on a sinister meaning. But I needed proof before I could make accusations. Wilson was smart, connected, and had the hospital administration's trust. Going against her without solid evidence would only make me look more guilty and desperate. I drove home to my apartment complex near 32nd Street in Camelback, a modest place with a community pool that nobody used and walls thin enough to hear my neighbor's TV every night. The security gate was broken again, and several streetlights were out, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I climbed the external stairs to my second-floor unit, keys ready before I reached the door. Inside, I spread the pharmacy documents across my kitchen table and started making a timeline. Every prescription corresponded to a day when Wilson was also working, when she would have known my exact location and schedule. The prescriptions were always for drugs that were commonly prescribed in emergency medicine, showing knowledge of what would seem normal for an ER nurse to prescribe. My laptop showed the hospital employee portal, and I logged in with trembling fingers. If Wilson was behind this, she'd need accomplices, people to pick up the prescriptions, distribute the drugs, handle the money. I started researching her background, looking for connections that might explain her sudden interest in illegal pharmaceuticals. What I found made my blood run cold. Linda Wilson's boyfriend, Marcus Rivera, had been arrested twice for drug possession in the past 2 years. Both charges were dropped due to procedural errors, but the pattern was clear. Wilson wasn't just stealing drugs. She was feeding an addict's habit and probably funding a distribution network. But as I sat there in my dimly lit kitchen, surrounded by evidence of the conspiracy destroying my career, I realized Wilson held all the cards. She had administrative access, the trust of hospital management, and months of carefully planted evidence against me. Proving her guilt would require catching her in the act or finding someone willing to testify against her. The question was, how do you trap someone who controls the very system you're trying to use for evidence? And what would Wilson do if she realized I was getting close to the truth? Outside my window, Phoenix stretched endlessly into the desert night, millions of lights twinkling like stars. Somewhere in that vast city, Wilson was probably planning her next move, confident that I would take the fall for her crimes. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated a nurse's determination to fight for what's right. Tomorrow, I would start building the case that would either save my career or destroy whatever was left of my life. The St. Mary's Hospital parking garage at 6 a.m. was nearly empty. Just a few cars belonging to the night shift staff who would be ending their round soon. I sat in my Corolla on the 3rd level, binoculars focused on the employee entrance, waiting for Linda Wilson to arrive. I'd been there since 4:30 a.m., surviving on convenience store coffee and the desperate hope that I could catch her making a mistake. Wilson's white Honda Civic pulled into her reserved supervisor spot at exactly 6:47 a.m. Even from a distance, I could see her checking her phone nervously before getting out of the car. She wore her usual long-sleeve scrubs despite the Arizona heat that was already building, and she glanced around the parking garage like she was expecting to be watched. I waited until she disappeared into the building before making my move. Wilson's car sat under a flickering fluorescent light, and I approached carefully, looking for any evidence that might connect her to the pharmacy visits. Through the passenger window, I could see hospital parking passes, empty cigarette packs, and something that made my heart race: a small notebook with what looked like license numbers written on the cover. But before I could get a closer look, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Jessica Martinez, my former coworker and one of the few people still talking to me. "Sarah, you need to get out of there right now," she whispered urgently. "Wilson just called security saying she saw a suspicious person in the parking garage. She's sending them to look for you." I ran back to my car as fast as I could, my sneakers echoing against the concrete. The elevator doors were already opening as I reached my vehicle, and I could hear security radios crackling in the distance. I managed to drive out through the exit ramp just as two security guards emerged from the stairwell. 20 minutes later, I met Jessica at a Denny's restaurant on McDowell Road, far enough from the hospital to feel safe. The morning crowd of construction workers and retirees provided good cover for our conversation. Jessica slid into the booth across from me, her usually perfect makeup showing signs of stress and sleepless nights. "Sarah, this is getting bad," she said, stirring her coffee nervously. "Wilson has been asking everyone questions about you, your financial situation, your mother's medical bills, whether you ever seemed desperate for money. She's building a case against you." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low despite the restaurant noise. "Jessica, I think Wilson is the one behind all this. She's been using my identity to write fraudulent prescriptions. I found evidence at multiple pharmacies." Jessica's eyes widened, but then she shook her head. "That's impossible. Wilson just got promoted to assistant director of nursing. Administration trusts her completely. Besides, why would she risk her career? Her boyfriend Marcus has drug problems. I think she's been feeding his addiction and probably selling to others." I pulled out my phone and showed her the research I'd done on Marcus Rivera's arrest record. "Look at the dates. They match up with when the fraudulent prescriptions started appearing." But Jessica still looked skeptical. "Even if that's true, how are you going to prove it? Wilson has access to all the hospital systems. She knows how to cover her tracks, and right now, all the evidence points to you." She was right, and we both knew it. I ordered eggs and toast that I couldn't taste while trying to figure out my next move. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and graying hair, refilled our coffee cups and asked if everything was okay. "You girls look like you're dealing with some heavy stuff," she said with a concerned smile. After Jessica left for work, I sat alone in the booth thinking about Wilson's reaction to seeing me in the parking garage. She'd called security immediately, which meant she was definitely watching for me, expecting me to investigate. That level of paranoia suggested guilt, but it also meant she was prepared for my suspicions. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Starbucks on Camelback and 44th Street. Come alone. L.W. Linda Wilson wanted to meet me." This could be a trap, an attempt to get me to confess to crimes I didn't commit, or it could be an opportunity to get the truth. Either way, I had to take the chance. The Starbucks was busy with the usual mix of business people and stay-at-home moms getting their caffeine fix before facing the day. Wilson sat in a corner booth, wearing civilian clothes instead of scrubs, jeans and a black long-sleeved blouse that covered her arms completely. She looked older than her 45 years, with deep lines around her eyes and the pallor of someone who smoked too much and slept too little. "Sarah," she said as I approached, her voice carrying that familiar raspy quality the pharmacists had described. "Thank you for coming. I know this situation must be very difficult for you." I sat down across from her, studying her face for any sign of guilt or deception. "It's difficult because someone is using my identity to commit crimes, and I'm being blamed for it." Wilson nodded sympathetically, but her eyes remained cold and calculating. "I've been thinking about your situation, and I want to help. The DEA investigation is very thorough, and they're going to find evidence whether it exists or not. Sometimes, when people are desperate, they make choices they never thought they would make." The way she said, "desperate," made my skin crawl. This wasn't a concerned supervisor trying to help a colleague. This was someone testing my resolve, seeing if I would crack under pressure. "I never wrote those prescriptions," I said firmly. "Someone with access to hospital systems and my personal information has been impersonating me. Someone who knows my schedule, my financial situation, and has experience with controlled substances." Wilson's expression didn't change, but I noticed her left hand twitch slightly on the table. For just a moment, her sleeve rode up, and I saw it, a crescent-shaped scar on the back of her hand, exactly as the pharmacist had described. "You know," Wilson said casually, "the DEA found some interesting things when they searched your locker yesterday. Prescription pads, drug samples that shouldn't have been there. It's almost like someone planted evidence to make you look guilty." My blood ran cold. She was telling me that she'd planted evidence against me, but doing it in a way that could be interpreted as sympathy if anyone was listening. This was a threat disguised as concern. "What do you want from me?" I asked quietly. Wilson leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I want you to take responsibility for your actions and accept the consequences. The hospital is willing to provide character references for your sentencing hearing if you cooperate with the investigation. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She was asking me to confess to crimes I didn't commit, to throw away my career and possibly my freedom to protect her criminal operation. The calculated cruelty of it took my breath away. "And if I don't cooperate?" I asked. Wilson's smile was cold as desert wind. "Then the evidence against you will continue to pile up until there's no doubt about your guilt. Trust me, Sarah. You don't want to fight this battle. You can't win." She stood up, leaving her untouched coffee on the table. "Think carefully about what I've said. Your mother's medical bills aren't going to pay themselves while you're sitting in prison." As she walked away, I realized that Wilson had just made a crucial mistake. She'd revealed that she knew specific details about my mother's medical situation, information that wasn't in my personnel file and that she could only have obtained through illegal access to my personal records. But more importantly, she'd underestimated my determination to fight for the truth. Wilson might control the hospital systems and have planted evidence against me, but she'd also just confirmed her guilt to someone who understood the stakes. The real question was whether I could prove her crimes before she destroyed what was left of my life. "Esto apenas es el comienzo. Lo mejor aún no ha pasado. Suscribí para descubrir cómo Sarah va a desenmascarar a la verdadera culpable." The evidence locker at the Phoenix Police Department felt like a tomb as Detective Morrison led me through the sterile hallways. It was 9 p.m., 3 days after my confrontation with Wilson at Starbucks, and I was about to see the planted evidence that could send me to prison for 20 years. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the polished linoleum floors. "Ms. Thompson, what you're about to see was recovered from your hospital locker during the DEA search," Detective Morrison said, his voice professional but not unkind. He was a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes that had seen too much human cruelty. "I have to ask you again. Are you certain you've never seen these items before?" The evidence bag sat on a metal table under bright lights. Prescription pads from 3 different doctors, sample medications that should never have been in a nurse's locker, and a handwritten notebook containing what appeared to be drug transaction records. But it was the notebook that made my hands shake. The handwriting was a careful imitation of mine, close enough to fool a casual observer but wrong in subtle ways that proved forgery. "Detective, this isn't my handwriting," I said, pointing to the notebook. "Look at how the G's are formed. I always loop mine clockwise, but these go counterclockwise. And these numbers, I write my 7s with a line through them, but these don't have that mark." Detective Morrison studied the pages carefully. "You seem to know a lot about handwriting analysis for a nurse." "My mother was a teacher for 30 years. She taught me to analyze writing patterns when I was helping her grade papers." I flipped through more pages, finding discrepancies on every sheet. This person tried to copy my writing style, but they made consistent errors that prove it's not authentic. But even as I explained the forgeries, I knew Wilson had been thorough. The prescription pads bore authentic doctor signatures that would be hard to disprove, and the drug samples were ones commonly found in emergency departments. Without additional evidence, my handwriting analysis wouldn't be enough to clear my name. That's when Detective Morrison's phone rang. He answered with his usual professional tone, but I watched his expression change as he listened to the caller. "Are you certain? How many witnesses?" He glanced at me with something that might have been hope. "We'll be right there." "Ms. Thompson, That was DEA Agent Rodriguez. They've made an arrest in connection with your case, and they need you to identify someone. We walked quickly through the police station, past holding cells and interview rooms where other people's lives were being dismantled by the justice system. The observation room overlooked an interview chamber where Linda Wilson sat in handcuffs, her bleached blonde hair disheveled and her usual confident demeanor replaced by panic. Next to her was Marcus Rivera, a thin man in his 30s with track marks on his arms and the hollow-eyed look of chronic addiction. Agent Rodriguez stood beside me as we watched through the one-way mirror. We arrested them an hour ago at Valley Drugs. Wilson was using your identity to pick up another fraudulent prescription, and Rivera was waiting in the car. The pharmacist Frank Gutierrez had gotten suspicious and called us when he saw Wilson approaching the store. Agent Rodriguez's voice carried satisfaction mixed with professional restraint. Mr. Gutierrez positively identified Wilson as the woman who had been impersonating you. Through the intercom, we could hear Wilson's voice, raspy from years of smoking and now cracking with fear. You don't understand. Sarah Thompson was my partner in this. I was just following her instructions. She needed money for her mother's medical bills, and I was trying to help her. But Marcus Rivera, either because of withdrawal symptoms or desperation, was telling a different story. Linda, stop lying. You planned all of this. You made me wait in the car while you went into those pharmacies pretending to be that nurse. You said it was foolproof, that no one would suspect a hospital supervisor. I watched Wilson's face contort with rage as her boyfriend destroyed her carefully constructed lies. Marcus, shut up. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Marcus shouted, his voice echoing in the small room. You stole that nurse's identity, you planted evidence in her locker. You made me sell drugs to kids at Desert Sky Mall. I'm not going to prison to protect your lies anymore. Agent Rodriguez turned to me with something approaching an apology in her expression. Ms. Thompson, based on Mr. Rivera's testimony and the evidence we're collecting, it's clear that you've been framed. We'll be dropping all charges against you and recommending that your nursing license be reinstated immediately. Relief flooded through me like warm water, but it was mixed with anger at the months of stress, the damaged reputation, the sleepless nights wondering if my career was over forever. Wilson had systematically destroyed my life to cover her crimes, and only luck and Rivera's conscience had saved me from prison. Through the mirror, I watched Wilson realize that her lies were collapsing. She looked directly at the observation window, as if she could see me standing there. This isn't over, Sarah, she said, her voice carrying cold fury. You think you've won, but there are other people involved, people with more power than you know. Detective Morrison made notes in his file. Ms. Thompson, Wilson's threat suggests this drug operation might be larger than we initially thought. We may need your continued cooperation as we investigate other hospital employees who might have been involved. Over the next 3 weeks, the full scope of Wilson's operation became clear. She had recruited 2 other nurses, a pharmacy technician, and a security guard to participate in the drug trafficking scheme. They had been using multiple stolen identities, not just mine, to write fraudulent prescriptions across the Phoenix metropolitan area. The operation had generated over $300,000 in illegal drug sales over 8 months. But the most shocking revelation came when investigators searched Wilson's apartment near Scottsdale. Hidden in her bedroom closet, they found detailed files on dozens of hospital employees, personal financial information, family medical histories, work schedules, and psychological profiles. Wilson had been systematically gathering blackmail material on her co-workers, identifying vulnerabilities that could be exploited for future criminal enterprises. My file was the thickest, containing photographs of my apartment, copies of my mother's medical bills, records of my daily routines, and even notes about my personality traits that Wilson thought could be used to manipulate me. The level of surveillance was terrifying and violated every notion of workplace privacy and safety. Wilson ultimately pled guilty to identity theft, drug trafficking, conspiracy, and racketeering charges. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for 8 years. Marcus Rivera received a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation, but his testimony revealed the human cost of Wilson's crimes. Families destroyed by addiction, young people introduced to dangerous drugs, and communities devastated by the flood of illegal pharmaceuticals. Returning to work at St. Mary's Hospital 3 months later felt like walking into a different world. The administration had implemented new security protocols, psychological evaluations for supervisory staff, and mandatory reporting systems for suspicious behavior. My co-workers welcomed me back with a mixture of relief and embarrassment. Many had believed Wilson's lies about me, and they struggled to reconcile their guilt with their happiness at my exoneration. But the experience had changed me in ways that would never fully heal. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering who else might be watching me, collecting information about my vulnerabilities. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't rebuild easily. Every new supervisor, every administrative request, every unusual interaction carried the possibility of betrayal. The night shifts I once loved became reminders of how Wilson had used my schedule against me, timing her crimes to coincide with my documented presence at the hospital. The prescription systems I navigated daily were the same ones she had exploited to destroy my reputation. Even the parking garage where I tried to gather evidence felt contaminated by the memory of her manipulations. 6 months after Wilson's conviction, I still work the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital, but I'm different now. I've learned that the people we trust most, supervisors, mentors, colleagues, sometimes harbor the darkest intentions. I've learned that a criminal with inside access can destroy an innocent person's life with frightening efficiency, and that the justice system, while ultimately fair, moves slowly while lives hang in the balance. The crescent-shaped scar on Wilson's hand, the detail that helped pharmacists identify her, became a symbol for me of how small details can reveal enormous truths. In nursing, we're trained to notice subtle changes that might indicate serious problems. A slight change in breathing, an unusual skin color, a patient's reluctant answers to routine questions. Those same observational skills saved my career and exposed a criminal conspiracy that could have destroyed dozens of lives. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had to fight against someone who held all the power? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories that reveal how ordinary people fight extraordinary injustices. My mother's cancer remains in remission, and the medical bills that Wilson used to justify her crimes are finally manageable thanks to payment plans and charity programs I found during my suspension. The irony isn't lost on me that Wilson's attempt to destroy me led me to discover resources I never knew existed, resources that made her supposed help unnecessary from the beginning.